and welcome to the latest Scots Way podcast. And it's the first of our best of 2022 podcasts where we are going to look at all things bookish. And I am delighted to be joined once again by Publishing Scotland's Vikki Reilly. Hello, Vikki.
Hello, Alistair.
Good to see you again.
And you. Cheers.
Cheers. We'll be drinking and talking books. Nothing better than that. So before we get into the individual books, what are the themes and trends that you noticed for 2022? Any spring to mind?
Yes. This year I've decided is the year of the memoir, because I think there was just a huge amount of memoirs this year. Obviously there's always celebrity ones and things like that, but within Scottish books, they were mostly about people and certain aspects of their life. There was always a theme running through them or something like that. And it was just a really rich variety of lives that I've been reading about this year. In fact, I think I read more non-fiction this year than I have for a long, long time. That's
interesting, because when you suggested memoirs, there was a couple that sprang to mind, but after that I was thinking, then I thought, well, there's a few musical ones as well, which we might come on to. But that's interesting. We will chat about some of those later on. But how was the year for you in books in general? Was it, because we always do this and we say that was another cracking year, but it really was another cracking year.
No, because I was worried, because last year there was quite a few books that were like big books from like sort of big authors.
Yeah.
I don't think there was I don't think there was as many of those this year, but there was still a lot of really interesting writing, a lot of them from new names. And so, and which really shows a breadth and depth of the kind of writing that's happening in Scotland. So, I mean, even like normal genres, which you sort of think Scotland's really strong in, like crime and all that kind of thing. I kind of had a less crimey year this year, just because there was so much more going on, which is great.
Very varied crimey year, which we'll also talk about later on. Something a little bit different there. But let's start going through some of the books of the year. I don't know what I started when we were thinking about this, going, that came out this year, that came out this year, and then realised that we talked about it last year. A classic example is Case Study. Because I saw Graham McCrae Burnett at Edinburgh Book Festival, I was going to put that down as one of my books of the year, and then I caught a picture of myself holding it from last year's thing, going, oh no, that was one of my books of last year. Did you find that?
Well, yeah, because I suppose last year was when the hardbacks came out, and this year is when the paperbacks came out, and usually the paperback sells more copies than the hardback. So a lot of the books that we did talk about last year were still, because I don't know if you know, but I every week I receive sales data from Nielsen Bookscan about the books that are set, that like a top 250 of books that are selling in Scotland, and I curate a Scottish interest chart. But you see everything that's sold in Scotland, and a lot of the books that we were talking about, because they came out in paperback this year, were still really high and doing really well, and so it was interesting to see that.
Well, I'm going to start with, in fact, no, let's be correct. You're the guest. You start. What was your first book you would like to talk about?
God, right, okay. Right. Well, we'll go fiction first.
Yes, fiction first. There's lots of fiction I want to talk about, so let's go with that.
Well, see, one of the themes particularly, I don't know if this was a theme in general or if just it happened to become a theme of my reading, was women in rage.
Okay.
Like angry women, and rightfully so. One of the books that I read earlier on in the year is this one, and for viewers at home or listeners at home, I'm holding up "O Caledonia" by Elspeth Barker, which did actually, this reprint came out.
I was going to say, that's been out a while.
Yeah. It's an old book. I think it was published in the 90s at first.
That's right.
Yeah, 1991. But it got a new cover treatment and a new introduction by, or was it, did she write an introduction or did she just write the blurb? No, she did write an introduction. by Maggie O'Farrell.
Mhm.
And Weidenfeld and Nicholson, who I don't normally think of when I think of folk that sort of delve back into backlists. But they brought this out very late in 2021, so it did really well over Christmas, and it continues to do well. And I'd never heard of Elspeth Barker, which I'm ashamed to say. And also this year, which is a shame because this book did so well, she died this year. She died earlier in 2022. So I'm pleased that she saw that and this is her one and only novel. She wrote one, and so I'm pleased that she got to see before she died that there was a big resurgence of interest in Elspeth Barker.
Because my memory is that it did well when it came out, you know. I mean, in terms of Scottish fiction, you know, it was talked about with a lot of the other writers that were around in the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I wasn't aware of it, so, but as soon as I saw it, like a lot of folk just started talking about it on Twitter, and I just always saw it on tables when I went into bookshop, which is always a sign that it's a book that's doing well, if bookshops are putting it on tables. And so I thought, and I picked it up and read the back, and I was like, oh, this sounds great. So it's about, if you don't know, if listeners or viewers don't know, it's about, it starts off with a murder. So we're told at the very beginning that this girl has been killed. And you, in the beginning, you kind of think, oh, is this going to be a whodunit? And you're going to find out who killed her in the end, which you do. You do find out who killed her in the end. But that's actually not the important part of the book. It's more they tell the life story of the girl that has been killed, and just, oh, it's just heartbreaking, but and full of just brilliant controlled rage in Elspeth's writing, just about this girl who is so desperate to find a way to be herself and have the world accept and allow her to be herself, and obviously, you know, it just didn't, and so she comes to a sticky end. But as I say, the death is kind of weirdly incidental. It's just kind of like the sort of, because people's behavior in this book is so strange, and and some elements of strangeness are just accepted as foibles, but it just seems like the world just cannot handle this girl. And it's just a great book of how difficult it was back in the day, because it's set in the early 20th century for young women especially to forge their own path and to be who they want to be.
I must go back and read that again, because I'm sure I read it when it came out, but I would have to yeah, the early 90s, I don't remember much. So but I will.
Glad to hear that.
I'll go and check that out. Would this fit into your Angry Woman, or would?
Oh yes, definitely. Yes.
So this is my first choice, and it's Jenny Fagan's Hex, and it's her entry into the, oh, what's it called again? Polygon's Darkland Tales.
Darklands, yeah. Both my Darklands are. I've lent them to. They're doing the journey in the Publishing Scotland office, so I don't have either of them with me.
But this was, I mean, again, it's fantastic novella. I mean, Jenny Fagan seems to be really having many moments at the time. Obviously, The Luckin Booth was one of the books of the year last year. This is one of my books this year. There's also her book of poetry, which came out near the end, which I'll talk about. It's a terrific collection as well. And this kind of fitted in to, it's part historical fiction, it's part science fiction. There's a kind of people communicating across space and time, and it's really weird and twisted, and exactly as you would expect from a Jenny Fagan book. One of yours favourites?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's the thing, like a lot of those books that all these angry women books that I've been reading, all of them do the rage in a different way, whether it's controlled rage or, you know, flights of fancy rage, but all of them are like sort of meticulous looks at the cruelty of the world around them, and how it's treated women in the past. in the present.
And that's the thing, isn't it? They often link, certainly Hex links the past to the present, and you know how little things have changed.
Yeah, and I mean, I just love the way Jenny Fagan writes. Like you know that she puts a lot of thought and care and precision in the words that she uses and all that kind of thing. But that's always just such an energetic, fearless expression, and I love the fact that, I don't know, like her book always seems like it's just like rules. Who cares about the rules? And she flings them out. But like, and I love the fearlessness of that. Another one is this book, Eleanor Knows, which I count as Scottish just because the publisher Charcoal Press is based in Edinburgh. But for those who don't know,
similar. Yeah.
For those who don't know Charcoal Press, and you should, they as I say, they're based in Edinburgh. But what they do is they do English language versions of fiction from South America, and Central America, sort of the Hispanic sort of speaking countries in Central and South America. Ooh, that's it. Yeah, and they're going like a train, Charcoal. And I mean, I didn't know this, but Claudia Pinheiro, I hope I pronounced that right, she's like a superstar in Argentina. And it just goes to show about the profile that Charcoal are building for themselves, that they are taken on and being trusted with big name authors from South America to be the person that brings them into the English language community. And this book is about a woman whose daughter has killed herself, but she's determined to find out that, well, she thinks that she didn't kill herself and that something more suspicious has happened. But it's really it's a day in her life of her going to visit this other woman who she thinks will have the answer to her daughter's death. And the mother is really I think is it MS or Parkinson's? I can't remember. Well, that's terrible. But she's got a degenerative disease, and so it's really, really hard for her to be in the physical world. Like, she has to take tablets so that she can walk, that she can travel, that she can to do anything. And so it's really about this day where she travels into the city to try and speak to this woman. And in the end, they do meet and they do talk, and there's a denouement, and you do find out what actually happened. And it's shocking. It's shocking, but it also, again, it's about women's roles in society and freedom, and how difficult it is to live free. And it's all about the different constraints. She obviously has her health restraints, but there's also other restraints about class and care and what's expected of women to behave. And it's just fantastic. It's one of those books that when you close it, you're kind of like, Jesus.
Well, it's funny you should say that, and I will talk about this now. I'm going to do it later, but similarly from Charcoal, it's Sylvia Malloy, Dislocations, translated by Jennifer Croft. And on the cover it says one of the most lucid writers of Latin America, and again a big literary star, which it shows you the great work that Charcoal are doing, because I wouldn't have read this if I hadn't been sent a copy to review. And again, it's dealing with problems when language, there's a character whose friend, the central character narrator, her friend is got Alzheimer's and is slowly slipping away to that. So she often, language becomes a problem, and even latterly eating becomes a problem. It's absolutely heartbreaking. But it's the deterioration of the memory that's perhaps the most uncomfortable, because the central character then thinks, well, if that side of memory is gone, shared memory, and only you have it left, what does it mean? What does it mean to have a memory that the other person no longer shares? Beautifully written book, absolutely stunning, and I don't read a lot of translated fiction, but it's because it's probably not presented to me. But actually, I'm going to read a lot more Charcoal books, because it's clear that what they're doing is just so interesting.
Yeah, and they do such a variety of different kinds of writing as well. And obviously because each of the places in South America will have their own traditions and culture and genres that work for them. So yeah, go on, Charcoal.
Absolutely. Do you have other books that you were going to talk
Yes,
about?
I don't have it with me. Again, I've lent it out, but it's a debut, and it's by an independent publisher called Blue Moose. Big shout out to Blue Moose, who are based in Northern England, and it's called I Am Not Your Eve, and it's by Davika Panambalam. I think I mentioned it as one to look out for last year, and it's a book about I can't remember her name, but it's a woman that features heavily in the paintings of Paul Gauguin, and it's told from her point of, well, it's told from multiple point of views. It's told from her point of view. It's told from Gauguin's daughter's point of view, who's still in Paris and wondering where the hell her dad is, and then there's a lot of the history and myth making from the Tahitian culture that the women in the paintings come from, and it asks a lot of questions about, you know, about how can somebody really, like, who thinks that they know these people because he's portrayed them in art, and but there's nothing in the art that goes into like the deep history of this culture, and it's about, you know, how somebody, you know, the trot was no the pram in the hall is that like Cyril Connolly or something like that, but like you know, like this artist has gone off to the southern hemisphere and his family are back in Paris and they want him back, but then there's an anger there, particularly from the wife. It's just really it's really well done, and again, like, the anger isn't overt, but it's there, and it also gives voice to a culture that was maybe not fully explored in the way that Gauguin maybe thought he was doing by painting the people in those places.
I wonder, I mean, we spoke about Hex talking from history to today, and I wonder if you could say the same thing about Sarah Smith's Hear No Evil, you know, which is based on a terrible true case where someone was seen throwing a baby into the Clyde, but she was deaf, and at the time there was no one to help take a statement, or even, you know, to help be a lawyer for her side, and how that unfolds, and then it turns into, you know, quite a thriller, and as it does. But at the heart, Sarah is basically helping to comment on, again, how things change so much today, you know, the problems that people face often with various disabilities, and how society looks at them.
Because I mean, it was before, you know, like, sign language and all that kind of thing was properly sort of introduced for the deaf community. So it was, yeah, it was really interesting about that, and also yeah, the like how communities sort of because the people like neighbors who might know more of the truth, and they weren't answering any of the questions, and I felt really sorry for the poor man that was trying to help her, because he was just like, just tell me what I need to know.
That's a terrific book. It's, again, one of my favorites of the year. Yeah, I look forward to see what Sarah Smith does.
Well, another debut as well.
I don't think we've spoken. Yeah, it is another debut, and we've got a few more that we'll speak about. But you know, with your theme, is there any others that you would like to talk about?
Well, I mean,
some of these books
not with the Angry Lady, because the other Angry Lady ones were not specifically like from a writer based in Scotland or anything like that. So I read other like non-Scottish ones, and I think that's going to be a theme next year too. Right. To be honest, you know, it's fair enough. Like, there's a lot to be angry about.
No, absolutely. And I was just thinking there, actually, and I'm going to show this because I've lent my mum the copy of the book, Karen Campbell's Paper Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, is at its heart commenting on how people get lost in the system with addiction, with simply bad luck, with all sorts of things. And then, you know, the central character is in Glasgow and homeless and, you know, gets taken advantage of. There's some heartbreaking writing in it. You know, the way that she's treated by people who just either ignore her or sometimes much, much worse, or walk by. And it is a journey, because, you know, she goes back to Galloway and kind of where she's from originally, and it's again beautifully written, and some of it a real advert for the Galloway Tourist Board. But at its heart, there is Karen's kind of real anger and frustration that certain things are allowed to be that way after all this time.
See, the section particularly, and because you're rooting for, because she is somebody that is troubled and insecure, and there's reasons for her insecurity and how she's reacted to them and the bad decisions that she's made in her life. And then that section in Wigtown, when she goes to Wigtown,
yeah.
Oh, that was because it's quite late on in the book by the time she gets there, and so you've been really like following her and rooting for her, and then she makes a few bad decisions in Wigtown, and you're just like, no, come on, you're so close. Oh yeah, it's such a great book. Yeah,
it's the kind of almost just before the final act, it takes you in a direction that you really weren't expecting or hoping.
I know.
Well, we said that Sarah Smith's Here No Evil was her debut, so let's talk a little bit about debuts. Do you have some that you want to bring up?
More debuts. Well, there was a lot of, I think another big theme this year, which we could probably talk about, is the rise of dystopian fiction. I mean, I actually think sci-fi is a bit of an underestimated genre that's really strong in Scotland. I think it's actually been strong for actually much longer than just recently.
For a long time, people just went Matthew Fitt, Button Ben and Go-Go, and then a couple of others. But you're absolutely right. People were writing science fiction and still are writing science fiction. Like translation, you maybe just didn't get to find it mainstream, for want of a better term.
Yeah, but like, you know, Ken MacLeod has been ploughing away for years. Yeah. Charles Stross, like folk like that. But I think there's been such a. I think it's understandable with the last few years that maybe folk, when they're writing about how the world is at the moment, that they turn to dystopia, and so we've got this one. There's a debut.
Yes, I've got that as well. I just read this the last couple of weeks, actually. The Pharmacist by Rachel Atala.
Yeah. I read that earlier on this year. See, that's the great thing about doing the Books from Scotland website, is that you do get sent a lot of books earlier than their publication. Yeah, which it was
a terrifying book, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, and it. I think the mood of it is created by the tone in which it's written. Like it's so calm and empathetic, and there's just like this sort of straight down the line. I don't think it's deadpan. That's not what. But there's like just such an understated tone to the narrator, and as if like all this is like inevitable, and just, you know, you just accept it. And even though it's horrendous, like the stuff that they're living through, but that makes it more terrifying, because it's just like, this is what it's like. The tone of it was so like clear and open-eyed, but it was, and so you were just like, oh, that's what made it more unsettling.
Because she stays calm in the most terrible of circumstances, you know?
Yeah, and these awful things happen to not just her, but a lot of the other characters as well. And, you know, she's placed in a dilemma, but like it, and there's so much, you know, that there's so much underneath all the characters in there, like of what happened before they were all in the bunker, but she doesn't really go into it. And so which is good, I think, because it adds this element of mystery, in that you really don't know how the characters are going to react to all the situations that they're in, and then sometimes they do shocking things, and you're just like, that's not a decision you should have made.
You're absolutely right about the secondary characters being so, you've got this kind of weird bunk bed situation, and you've got this couple below, and the wife's an absolute delight, who takes her to Berlin, and and all takes her to kind of save
Oh,
her.
she was lovely. I was just like, God, the simple pleasures that you have to find in such a horrendous circumstance.
But I said about it that this is science fiction, but horrifically, you could imagine in a few years' time it is just fiction.
Don't say that. Just please don't say that.
Maybe I was just in that mood while I was reading it, or it produced that mood in me. I'm not quite sure which. But you're absolutely right. Dystopian fiction this year, probably for all the reasons you suggest, was really big. And one which I didn't know this at all was D.D. Johnson's Disneyland.
Right,
And it is dystopia, but kind of set again in a very recognisable future where, things have gone over the tipping point. But again, it wouldn't take much imagination to think, oh, is this coming soon?
Yeah.
It was the first thing I'd read from D.D., and we had him on the podcast, and he was.
Is that a debut as well?
I don't think it is. I think he's had novels out before, and I remember speaking to him. He's certainly been writing before. I don't know whether that is or not, but it says here he writes books, plural, that are funny as hell. So I'm presuming he's written others, and I would like to check them out further. But this is also very funny. It's kind of like if the guys from Still Game had written a dystopian, novel. There's lots of weird kind of characters in the community, and it's class ridden, and but it's how people start to, at its heart, it's got a positive message that people will, even in the worst of times, hopefully start to come together and help each other. But it's very good. It's darkly comic, and I would check that out. D.D. Johnson, Disneyland.
Yeah, another one which I read recently that you kind of, maybe because it was set in Edinburgh, I don't know, but like you kind of was like, it kind of felt that, like you said, that it could happen soon, which is this one by Daniel. All right, okay.
I'm reading this right now, so no spoilers. Right. And I'm really enjoying it because it's so weird to begin with. I don't know how it kind of goes out, but explain what's going on without spoiling.
Yeah, so Model Citizens by Daniel Shand. It's set in Edinburgh. It's set in an Edinburgh where Fife has been exploded. Fife doesn't exist anymore. And so Edinburgh is full of these Fife refugees. So there's been this big traumatic event in Fife, and then you've also got it's quite futuristic because it's got these various things, and one of the things is that you create a clone of yourself called, what was it called again? The
Junior.
The Junior, aye. Yeah. So if you've got a clone, the clone is called Junior, and you're a senior if you have a clone. And so you can send the Junior home, like to your work, and they do your work for you and all that kind of stuff. But also, you're also plugged into this sort of social media landscape where you have to build your stats, which is how you build your status within the world that we're living in. And all this has been created by this mad, technocratic, crazed gazillionaire, Elon Musk.
I was just going to say that. That sounds familiar.
And he's Scottish too, and so he's in it too because he's trying to get to Mars, and then
that's a twist I didn't see happening. So that's interesting.
Oh shit! Sorry.
No, that's fine.
So he's kind of, and there doesn't seem to be any government in it as well. Like this system that's been created just a kind, everybody just sort of self-governs themselves by being within this social media place where you build your stats. And then things, I don't know how far you're into it.
He's just, to put it some way, one of the characters has just been dumped and his stats may suffer as a result. So quite early on.
So you are still quite early on. And then there's also this sort of anarchist terrorist group called the 97ers, who are nostalgic because they see the 90s as this glory period that we should hark back to.
Are they set up and is it Summer Hall? It's something.
It does sound like that is what I had in my head. Like I totally pictured Summer Hall as well. I was like, yeah, they're all living in Summer Hall. So like I was totally
thinking about the 90s.
Windows. Yeah, like facing out to the meadows and all that kind of stuff. And then something happens other than being dumped. Something else happens to the Alistair, the main character, which. And the thing that happens to him is something unexpected, and he tries to like project it onto social media and say, "Look at this," and then all hell breaks loose, and so he has to go on a journey to sort of see if he could see if something can be solved. So I won't say any more, but I'm
looking forward to it. It's hooked me already.
Yeah, it's because of the Edinburgh setting and the fact that Fife just blew up. I hope Fife doesn't blow up, by the way. but it's very plausible.
Like Disneyland, because they set it in real settings in Scotland, you know, you do have that feel about things. Yeah.
And there's this, I don't know if you've got to this bit, there's this really horrific new mode of transport where you in effect drug yourself and then these drivers like just pick you up and you're in your comatose state and take you where you want to go. And I'm just like, how did this catch on?
Eating as well. The pouch things that they cover. Really, very good. Quite different to me from Daniel's other. Was it Daniel? Have I got the right name? Yeah, Daniel Shand's previous book. So I'm really looking forward to finishing it.
Yeah, because he's a crocodile. I've not read that one. So this is the first of his.
I remember it being more of a kind of almost dark young adult book. It's a while since I've read it, so I hope that's not a mistake. We'll talk about Ever Dundas's Hell Sands, another of my books of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this, like, there's two books that I've got beside me that are vying for my favorite book of the year, and I think Hell Sands is definitely one of them. There's quite a lot of similarities, I think, to Hell Sands and Model Citizens, where the world is quite similar, and I think they tackle similar themes, but they do it in wildly different ways. There's because of that Edinburgh Fife element to Model Citizens, that kind of feels more rooted in the real world, whereas Hell Sands is just such a feat of imagination. I'm just like, what the hell is it? But in such a brilliant, joyous, imaginative, explorative way. I was blown away by it.
There are still real world reference. I think someone's got a Pearl Jam CD and there's a kind of you know, there are little bits like that kind of drag you into this isn't so removed, although it kind of, well, is it? I'm not sure again. Is there more or less bodily fluids in Daniel's book or in it?
There is much more bodily fluids in Ever's book than there is in Daniel's book.
I was just going to say, I spoke to Ever about this, and she did say that her editor said, "Could you take some of this?" And so I can imagine what it was like.
I must admit, even though there's so much vomit in it, there was a scene in particular, and you'll probably know the scene that I'm talking about, where this is the only time while reading a book I've been reading a fight scene and I've been like screaming at the book, "Vomit on her! Vomit on her!"
And another interesting thing about it is you can read it. There's two central characters whose lives cross over, but you could read it, you know, back to front, if you know what I mean, you know, the second part first. Yeah, it's an astonishing, as you say, feat of imagination. You just get the sense that there was glee writing this book.
Yeah.
Absolute glee.
Yeah, like the pace of it, the action-packedness of it, like it was just such a thrill ride, and maybe like, and so full of ideas as well. Just, but because like it's such a breakneck speed, you probably don't like realize just how many ideas are packed into it about technology, about our bodies, about power, and about how we like interact with each other, and love, and desire, and ambition, and morality, like your own sense of morality, and oh, it's just, there's just so much in it. It's just so full, so full.
And should say at its heart is this idea that there's a font that makes people high unless you're allergic, and then you're really in trouble. And you know, it's such a brilliant idea. And again, you know, I loved Goblin. It was such a great novel, and it's so great to have ever Dundas back and writing like this, because she's just one of the best. I've got
I don't think anybody. Sorry, but I just like the characters as well. There's such a fearlessness in how demented our characters are as well. Like she'll just go there, and I just love it.
I was reviewing it, and I said it's like J.G. Ballard meets the body horror of David Cronenberg. And I think that's absolutely right. It's proper sci-fi in many spaces, and really classy and beautifully written, and all, you know, it's big on ideas and big on philosophy and all of those things. And then you've got like Scanners, or you know, whatever early David Cronenberg movie might come in. So for fans of those, you know, you're in for an absolute.
Every mention of every bit of skin cracking, I was just picturing Scanners. And I was just like, this is really horrible.
Yeah, you know, I don't read it. I guess it is almost horror fiction, isn't it? And I don't tend to read a lot of horror anymore. I was a big fan when I was young, like Stephen King and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is sci-fi horror in a kind of brilliant way.
Dark as anything.
Yeah. And so is this next novel, which I want to mention, because again, we had him on the podcast, Nick Holdstock's Quarantine,
Right.
which kind of moves around the world with these very dark. People are basically getting quarantined after, you know, a global pandemic and spread, and different people are treated very differently. And one of the characters looking for a cure, and other characters are in really camps similar to The Bunker in The Pharmacist, you know, that kind of thing. It's very sensual. Again, a bit like Ever's novel, it kind of attacks you with horror at times. You're off how things should be, and quite rightly so, because these are horrible, horrible situations that we're being asked to imagine. It was really interesting to talk to Nick and to hear more about Quarantine. I'd almost forgotten that this book was out this year, but when you'd mentioned kind of dystopian, I went, aha, that's also one.
I know, in a way, well, I don't know, because this is the thing. I bet you all these books were probably, or they were at least started pre-pandemic, and yet they feel so prescient because of it.
Yeah, well, we're kind of applying our situation onto these books and saying, they must be this. But nearly everyone I've spoken to said, oh no, I started it in, you know, 2019 or something like that.
Like maybe it's just like the cultural firmament in the air. This was coming.
Now, I want to talk about another couple of debuts, if that's okay with yourself.
Okay with me.
Now, they say never judge a book by the cover, right? It's difficult, as you know, it's difficult. And I have to say,
don't believe in that phrase.
When I picked up Kenny Boyle's The Tick and Talk of the Clock,
right,
I just wasn't sure what I was going to think about it. But actually, it's the most sensitive and kind of beautiful take on depression and suicide and manic and all sorts of things. And when I started it, I didn't expect that. And by the end, I'm nearly in tears. I mean, it's beautifully written. Kenny's probably better known. Well, he is better known as an actor. You know, he's been in film and TV and theatre. But I think this is his debut novel, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that cover. It just wasn't for the book that I ended up reading. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting debut for me, which has stuck with me kind of throughout the year.
Yeah. It's good when that happens, isn't it? When like you just catch yourself thinking about it, and it's like the world that they've created still exists in your brain.
Yeah, no,
You're like, I
absolutely.
wonder how they're getting on.
Right. The characters, you really do fall for these characters who are so relatable. And again, that whole thing about being relatable about a Daniel Shan's book being set in Edinburgh, which kind of made you relate. This is set not just in Glasgow, but a lot of it in the south side of Glasgow. Literally, about 5 or 10 minutes walk from here, I could go to the cafe and all that kind of stuff. And there is something really lovely about that. You know, I played a song on the radio yesterday which mentions Cathkin Braes, which is very near where I was brought up. And my mum was going, I've never heard Cathkin Braes mentioned on a song before. But there is something, you know, but you'd be wrong to deny that there's a kind of extra aspect of that, I think. Now, which I could also put into the next debut, which I wanted to talk about, which is Ryan O'Connor's novel, The Voids. And I'll say it now because I've said it elsewhere. This is my book of the year. I absolutely adore this book. It's so.
I think that will probably appear in a lot of book of the year lists. I think I said that, Tom.
There was a fantastic launch, which I was very honoured to chair through in Edinburgh. And so we got to chat with Ryan afterwards, and it was a great event, and it was great to it's a great Glasgow novel. For your debut to be a genuinely great novel is saying something. Again, kind of J.G. Ballard, but you follow this character who is making his way almost like almost kind of James Joyce, making his way over a weekend round at the city, and the characters that he meets and the places that he goes and the thoughts that he has, and there is humour in it as well, despite the darkest stuff that you're probably going to read this year. And it's not science fiction this time around. It's you know, it's the real people's real lives, the drama of real people's everyday lives. Yeah, I absolutely love The Voids. I could probably go on about it for the rest of the podcast, but I'm already noticing that we are.
Yeah, I think because, you know, if you sort of said to somebody, oh, it's Glasgow, it's alcoholism, it's you know, high-rise flats, people would probably assume, oh, I've read that before.
You really
but
haven't.
It's absolutely like, and even for a book that's got such sort of grim, dark subject matter, there was something in Ryan's writing, I don't know how he does it, there was such energy to it, like such propulsive energy to it, that you never felt you were being dragged down into the depths that obviously the character was feeling. But even then, like, you don't get the sense that the character was enjoying what he was doing, and like like Paper Cup, you were like, why do you continue to make bad decisions?
But at times they do, and it's not about a judgment. I think that's the thing. It's not about morally judging or any kind of judging. This is the life that the central character has at the moment, and it's just sheerly expressing it and sending it out on the page.
But there's so many moments of tenderness in it as well, that it's really moving. It was really unexpected, because I did kind of go into it going, right, I know what I'm expecting here, but it just wasn't that.
And it's just not that.
Yeah, but it wasn't that at all.
It's a part of Glasgow that I think places in Glasgow, people of Glasgow that really haven't been written about before. You may think they have, but they haven't, and not in this way, not in this understanding and, as you say, tender and affectionate way. Usually it's just, you know, drink, drugs, you know, all aspects are in the book, but there's no judgment there, which I absolutely love. I think I can't wait to see what Ryan does next, because
totally
it's an amazing start. Beat that, as they say.
I don't know.
No pressure, Ryan, if you're listening.
Right, are we still talking fiction?
We're still talking fiction, because I want to rush through a few others that I wanted, you know, briefly mention.
So I'll just also, this is another, it falls into the debut, it falls into the dystopian as well, though it's a different kind of dystopia, because it's not actually, it feels kind of, it could be in the future, but it's a book that's set in this a cinema, like this really dilapidated sort of seen better days cinema. And like ever Dundas's book as well, it's full of bodily functions.
Now, you haven't mentioned what it is yet for listeners. I have to remind you.
Oh, sorry, have I not? Sorry, it's called Children of Paradise by Kamila Grudova. And Paradise is the name of the cinema that it's set in. And it's just a sort of ragtag bunch of people who aren't really looking for proper jobs, as you say, and they've found themselves in this sort of cinema that's a little less loved than it should be, but it's told in this sort of hallucinatory, gothic, strange way in which weird things happen, and the fate of the cinema just gets worse and worse and worse. But it's all, again, it's tender because it's about like that sort of loneliness of people that are starting out into their sort of adulthood and all that kind of thing, and how you sort of find yourselves in this group of people. But it's also, I mean, I'm definitely not as much of a cinephile as Kamila is. I think actually she works in the Cameo, and that's what I kept picturing in my head when I was reading this book. But there's so much, like, there's a total love letter to the cinema as well. And it's just a really great book. And like Ever's book, I quite like all like talking about the stink of things and all that kind of visceral, sensual quality to it all, because it's part of life.
Well, that's a perfect book for me to then talk about Kirsty Wishart's The Projection.
Right, okay.
For me, which is a love letter, not just to cinema, but to cinemas. The kind you would find in seaside towns, a bit run down now, that might show old black and white movies and still have people want. It's
all these old Art Deco buildings.
Yeah, exactly, and it's like British seaside town, if written by Hitchcock. There's Hitchcockian vibes, there's twists and MacGuffins and all sorts of things going on. Great characters. Kirsty Wishart, again, it's with the Reimer Books, I should say. They published The Knitting Station, which was a previous book. I think this is a step up. I think this is a real step up for Kirsty. I just absolutely loved it. It's funny, it's quirky. If you love cinema, if you like cinema, then you'll absolutely love it. Classic cinema in particular, it's got a picture of Citizen Kane on the cover and that kind of thing. So if you like your kind of black and white classic cinema and the stars off the stage and screen there, then this is great. Set in a town called Seacrest, which has a year-long movie festival. It never stops. So it brings in film buffs from all over the year. And but there's lots of kind of, a bit like an Ian Banks book, there's lots of family agitation and there's history and things that happened in childhood and all that comes in. So yeah, I highly recommend it as well.
I like Kirsty Wishart. She's sort of just like quiet, deadpan, but left field, sideways glance at the world. I just really like the way she looks at things.
Absolutely, yeah. It's different from other people, and nobody kind of writes like her, which is really nice. Have you got? While we're still on fiction, do you have anything else you want to bring up?
Oh, well, will we go on to the big event books now?
Oh, I didn't know we were doing big event books. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Well, because we were talking earlier on about how there was fewer big event, like sort of big name books, but I think there was two in particular. I mean, there's probably more, but
I think I can think of at least one more, which we'll talk about.
So things that they were much anticipated. So first of all, there was the much anticipated follow up to The Cutting Room, Louise Welsh's The Second Cut, which was the first book that I read in 2022.
I think it might have been mine as well. What's the anniversary? 20 years, is that right? Is
it 20 years?
You continue talking and I'll check.
Well, I mean, and it's a welcome back to Rilke,
Oh, I
who
love Rilke. What a great character.
I know, and he's older and more grizzled. Is he wiser? I think he is a little bit wiser.
He's older, and I think with that brings a lot of the things that go with it. He's less likely to be. I mean, he's still quite outrageous in places, but he's less
Yeah.
like. I mean, the party he ends up at.
Oh God, that's such a funny
amazing.
scene.
And it reminds you what a fantastic writer Louise is, with such a kind of twinkle in her eye when she's writing a lot of this stuff.
It's like there's a whole lot of twinkle in the eye with this whole book. Not just that, see, because the world has changed, particularly in the LBGT community.
Because you should say it's modern day.
Yeah, because it's set in present day, isn't it?
Yeah,
or as near enough.
Yeah,
has the pandemic? Yeah, the pandemic sort of happened. There's chat about masks and shit, isn't there? Yeah. So Rilke has seen the like Glasgow and the world really change in the last 20 years. And like how I love how when he comes up against the sort of current generation of those in the LGBT community, and how their confidence and fearlessness projects itself, and he because he comes from a time where he had to be a little bit more covert about his sexual
absolutely, that kind of, and makes me think it probably is 20 years. Let's say it is, and if I'm wrong, I'll put an apology. I've got a feeling it is. That's when the first one came out. Yeah,
and so I like that push and pull between the two characters, the two generations, where there's. But also, there's a strange mourning for the loss of that sort of more secret world of days gone by as well. It's a really interesting. It's really interesting.
I think that's partly the older person's, a bit like my early 90s, looking back fondly on things that were probably in some ways not very good at all. But you thought, the nostalgia is a heady.
It is, isn't it? So I mean, but that's just a part of it. Obviously, you've got your baddie, your big baddie, and then you've got these mysterious deaths happening that and because it's one of his friends that dies, Rilke comes in to sort of see if he can get to the bottom of why his friend died the way he did. So there's heavy element of mystery and crime solving and all that kind of thing. And plus the world of the auction house, which
and great secondary characters again, fantastic characters.
Yeah, because that's not a world that I know a lot about, but I love reading about it as well, and going into rich people's house and just picking out over all their goods and things. It just sounds mad to me.
I know, it's amazing. No, it was great to have Rilke back. It was great to have Louise Welsh back, and a fantastic read.
Absolutely. And the second much anticipated book of this year was probably Young Mungo. Douglas Stewart has quickly become a superstar, hasn't he?
Did you see the Imagine that was on the other night?
I did.
With what's his name? Oh, I forget. Who does it?
Alan? No, is it Alan Yentob?
Yeah, who looked terrified on the weekend in Glasgow. And he was like, oh, and he was in
walking through the barrows,
sweet shop, going, what's going on here? It's very funny, but it's actually really good. And they had Lulu reading some of the books.
No, she was really good actually. I was surprised at how good she was doing get her doing the audiobook. But yeah,
I have to admit I haven't read it, which
That's
is really
right.
bad of me. But there you go. I will. I've got a copy up there. But it was interesting. Maybe you can talk about this with your publishing hat on. That when it came out, it was everywhere. It was in every indie bookshop. I think there was even independent bookshop editions. And wow, they really did a hell of a marketed job on it.
Yeah. That's what you can do. So when you've got a budget behind you. I like to see that. I like to see folk doing things that make books feel like events, because people that aren't even in the book sort of that consider themselves booky will then become aware of it. for example, that, that like when the Testaments, Margaret Atwood's The Testaments came out, and they were like shining big light things on London, big London buildings and all that kind of thing. You were just like, okay, that probably cost a shit ton. And actually, how many more books does that actually sell? But at the same time, I like things to be made to feel like an event. So I like the fact that you would go into a Waterstones and like they'd made up like a fake ducat to go in and pretend that you're talking to your pigeons or whatever. You like to see that, because folk will be like, "What's that all about?" And then they get told about it, and sometimes you want that kind of excitement, because books they're not just up against themselves, they're up against games, they're up against films, they're up against telly, they're up against everything. So
I guess my worry is that when they're so everywhere, that it stops anyone else who's got a book out that week from maybe getting attention. But I guess you're maybe that's going to happen anyway. I don't know. But I understand it. I understand the economics of it. And when there's something is so big, as you say, in 2 books, he's become an absolute superstar, then I do get it. I just, it's a bit like...
He was like the hardest working man in show business on those like 2 weeks that it was first out as well. I think he was in a different bookshop every day for a fortnight. So you just have to, I like this, because the thing is, what I did as working for an independent publisher, or what other independent publishers can do, when you see the sheer amount of effort that's put into a single book, right, we can never ever do that because we just don't have the budget. But you just extrapolate the ideas, extrapolate what the build up, the build up of buzz and all that kind of thing. You say, okay, well, how can I figure that out into my own space? Into because that's what a printer's for. A color printer. You just need a color printer. You can you just
seen the price of ink. That's going to bankrupt most independent publishers. But I know what you mean. Right. I know what you mean.
But there are ways of making things feel like an event to booksellers without spending HUD's money as well. So I always want independent publishers to see that as inspiration, because even when I did work in publishing, I would always start when I was thinking of ideas and things, and it was always the same in a meeting or whatever. I'd be like, we could do this, and I would say the most outlandish thing. And so you say the big idea, and then you're just like, well, and then from that big idea you sort of pull it back to the thing that you can afford to do. Yeah. Because that's how you have to get attention for your books.
And there are publishers who are very, very good at that.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah, no, absolutely right.
Yeah, there absolutely are.
But so this maybe takes me to I've got 2. I'm now classifying them as big events. They really are. And one, a publisher who really does know, and we'll talk more about them later, who know how to get things out there, is White Rabbit Books.
Yes.
David Keenan's latest, Industry of Magic and Light.
I've not got it beside me. It's in my bedroom, though.
Which took us back to Airdrie, but even earlier than Memorial Device. And I think this might be David's most accessible book so far. I mean, it's nuts and everything, but maybe it's because I'm used to...
maybe anything after Monument Maker would seem accessible.
Seem portable compared to that. I love this book. I love going to the kind of weirdness of a 60s and 70s Airdrie, and all the kind of thing. The way that it's done is going through objects which are found and which have been kept and curated, and that's how the story unfolds. And it can be those simple things like a bubblegum wrapper to posters for events and things that may, or as always with David, may or may not happen. All of those kind of things. And then it goes to Afghanistan at the end, and there's somehow these things are linked because it's highlighted or it's mentioned in the first part. Yeah, maybe I'm just getting more used to reading Keenan.
Yeah.
But I thought this was the most accessible book. If someone said, where can I start? I would probably say Memorial Vice
Yeah.
Device to start with. But this is such a great prequel to it. I loved it.
Yeah. That's the thing, because it was set in the 60s, and you know, I'm a bit of a sort of 60s geek. And so I was really looking forward to this one, because it does talk about, you know, the sort of the happenings and the cultural things that were going on, and the weird things that people were doing, and that were, you know, harking back to like the avant-garde scene and the music scene and psychedelics and all that kind of stuff. And it was so, yeah, this was total manna from heaven for me. And I love the idea of a biography told by, because that is kind of what it was. It was like a biography told in objects. But as with David Keenan, he sort of invites you into a world that is at once totally familiar and completely just out of this world as well. And I love the juxtaposition. Like, I don't think he sets out to represent like working class culture or whatever, but the notion, like, it blows my mind, because it still happens that people think that working class people don't have culture or don't do culture. I mean, I don't think you've been paying attention. I genuinely do not understand how anybody can possibly think that. But these books just show that, you know, when folk, you know, like want to find the joy and want to find freedom in another way, then culture is what they go to. And it's just, it's brilliant. You always know, oh, the mad guy that does that. It's like, oh, see him. What? It's like, and we know so many of these characters. It's just so ingrained in us all, and it blows my mind that folk think that, you know, working class people are just all about Love Island, or and not that there's anything bloody wrong with, well, actually, I have no idea. I don't watch Love
Island. Yeah, probably not the best example, but
I know it was rubbish. I don't even know. I don't even watch it myself, but but yeah.
The other big event, and I think makes not just the point that you've made, but also is maybe the anti Young Monroe, is James Kelman had a novel out this year.
Of course, yeah.
Spoke about it. And it's a brilliant novel. It's funny as anything. It's relaxed.
Am I right in that the publisher is an American publisher?
Publisher is PM Press in Oakland. And that might be the reason that it's not done anything here. They also publish a lot of his nonfiction as well, I noticed when I was on their website. And it may be that being on an American publisher, he reaches more people just by the amount of, you know, folk that are out.
Isn't that how he started off as well? Like, wasn't his first? Yeah, like, so in a weird way, it's kind of like full circle.
I think that would probably appeal to him.
But that means UK publishing scene, if you're watching, that if PM Press has the English language rights, then maybe the UK and Ireland ones are up for sale.
A little bit of advice there from our sponsor. It's one of my favourite books of the year again. The story of Jack Proctor. See if this sounds familiar. Jack Proctor, a celebrated older writer and curmudgeon who goes off to residency where he's to be honoured, teach and give public readings. He was a Banker prize-winning author back in the day. So clearly this is so Kelman. It's unbelievable. And I think it makes a really lovely companion with Kieran Smith Boy, which is clearly Kelman as a boy, that all that gets through. And this is Kelman as he is now, or recently. It's described as this is the literary version of This Is Spinal Tap. I think that's overdoing it. That's overdoing it a little bit. But
does he go to Graceland and sing harmonies?
Exactly. But I had a really good time reading this. It was like catching up with an old pal. And there's still big ideas, there's still philosophy, there's still anger at situations that you would expect, all of those things. But yeah, really, really enjoyable, James. And a reminder, I've gone right back to the bus conductor Hines, that it's always been a funny writer, you know, that he sees the humor and darkness a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Disaffection's another great example. Highly recommend that.
Yeah, I've read bits of it, and what he done, what's done really well is I really actually like it when it's a bit of a soft spot for me in books and in all culture actually, is that sort of barely suppressed hysteria which could erupt at every moment at like the puzzlement of the world and why it's like that. And I think he does that so well, where you know, like he's just on the cusp of having an explosion.
Well, he's basically kind of going, what the fuck's going on? Nearly through the whole book. That's kind of, you know, and it's lovely to think how, you know, because he's basically on these university tours where he's expected to do all these certain things. And, oh, really? I mean, you want me to do that? And I'm a writer, I'm not a, you know, and I just feel that there's lots of frustration being spent from that aspect of the book, how maybe the book world works these days, as opposed to it maybe did when he started out.
Yeah, there are, you know, we can't deny that, you know, there's folk in the business that you're just like, how are they? How? But there's lots of good folks too, and that's the main thing.
Is. We'll be talking about more of them. I've got a few novels I'd just like to mention, and we'll have to do it quickly. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Others that you wanted to?
Yeah, well, we do a sort of quick fire flash.
Round. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about Philip Miller's The Golden Acre, which is it's kind of, oh man, we haven't even talked. I've just looked to my right and seen.
We haven't talked about crime.
Okay. It's a crime book, but it's a really classy crime book. It's kind of set in the art world, set in the high art world, and yeah, I just absolutely loved it. I'll say that about all of these books, I have to say. The latest in Olga Vochas's Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Weird Sisters this time round, which is all things kind of Hamlet and, you know, all that kind of stuff. No, Hamlet.
No, Macbeth.
Oh dear, oh dear. Macbeth. Yeah, again, always funny, always great to get those. Donald S. Murray, another favourite writer of ours, The Call of the Cormorant. You've got that there. What a beautifully written. Oh, it's all Donald's a beautiful writer, but it's taken a kind of character from history and brought him to life. Certainly for me, I had no idea about this person.
No, neither had I. Yeah.
Recently, and it's around about the time of the World Wars. And I think the character eventually moves from, I think, the Faroe Islands to Denmark to Berlin. Yeah, always good to read. Donald.
That was another book where I thought I knew what I was going to read when I started, and it just totally like confounded expectations. It's
really weird and some often dislikable character.
Yeah. Oh, he was a total arse.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you agree with me. Liam Bell's Man at Sea, which is another kind of historical novel, and it was great to read something new from Liam because I've enjoyed his previous novels. And it's about someone trying to go back and discover what had happened previously to them, and then, you know, not being able to, and actually having ulterior motives for going back to somewhere where he was in a flying a plane and was shot down and was injured and in hospital, and then fell in love with his nurse, and, you know, all these kind of things. It's a lovely book. Another one, one which really looked at old age in a beautiful and honest way, was Martin Geraghty's George Bunce and the Black Plague of Fear. You know, and George Bunce is in a kind of Largs, I think it might even be Largs.
I think it was Largs, yeah.
Old folks' home, because he had to get out of his house and he really doesn't want to be there, and he is fighting against the dying of the light and all of those things. And it's just such an honest look at what old age can mean and the things that come along with it. I think Martin's a great writer. I'm hoping there's something else coming from him very soon.
Yeah, though that was a book that kind of had you worried about the character so much, and so when he had these happy moments, you kind of punched the air.
Yeah, it was a real punch the air things. You know, he gets through everything, and you can see why he's frustrated at everything, and but there's little victories, and that's what he's carrying on, those little victories. And one that I just finished recently, because it's only,
of course,
is F. David Ross's Dashboard Elvis is Dead.
Yes, I finished that recently
Oh,
too.
what did you think? I just
I
thought
loved it.
that whole kind of panoramic look at American culture and society, and because I was thinking, how is he going to follow up his last book? Because it had just been, so successful. It was shortlisted for the Saltires, and I think it took his writing to another level.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What he's done is by going to America and brilliantly looking at big themes of America, and also through all of his great soundtrack that he does with all his books, and it's transatlantic as well, and he links it to events in Scotland. Yes, is a big theme that runs through the whole book, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. Which is quite a David Keenan thing as well.
Well, it is. I gave my top 10 books for Snack Magazine, but it was before I'd read this, and I have to say, this would have featured, and I've still to do the Scots Way version of it, and if it goes up to 11,
just do a whole different one.
I'll just go, this one goes up to 11. And
he does this thing like he did it with Danny Garvey, and where you get to the end and you just want to punch him. You're like, how dare you do that to me?
For taking the feet right out. Yeah, I mean, we can't give anything away, and of course, I was so distraught at the end of this book.
Oh my God.
I mean, I think the central character, and I'll have to remember the name, Jude Montgomery, is one of the great characters I've read in recent times. She's so good.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many moments where you're just like, no.
What are we going to do, Vikki? I mean,
I know.
We're now on 15 in, and I've not even touched the crime pile, and I've got non-fiction and poetry. I think we might have to split this into two. Yes. So everyone, we're going to start with crime fiction. When you come back, we'll go through that quite quickly. But that is the end of this Scots We Hae podcast about the part 1 of their best books. We'll see you very soon for part 2.